Good morning, API. Yeah, that's probably not going to be anywhere near as cool as it was in my head. All right, so welcome to another special extra overflow session of API reviewing this week. We have a 2-item agenda, and we hope we get to leave early because some of us would like to do things other than be in meetings all day. So, 47649er, writable DOM and dynamic for JSON. Steve, you're up.
Okay, yeah, can you just scroll all the way to the bottom? I have a diff from the last time we met. So if we want to start with this, that'll save time, assuming we completed everything else, and this is basically the action items since last time. I'll just let you read through it. I can talk through it. So JSON array, this was not discussed last time, but writing the test, it became apparent that we wanted to have a factory pattern here because we treat a JSON element null value, which is not a null, it's a value type, so it's JSON element value kind of null. We treat that in JSON node as an actual CLR null value. So I think the factor pattern works better, and that applies also to JSON object and JSON value as well. The other one I just mentioned in the bullet there, I didn't do the diff on it, but there was just kind of a typo, array index versus index. If you're looking at iCollection versus dictionary, they have different names for properties. But you can also, if you want, go up to the main. You don't want to do this, Jeremy, but others can go up to the main link and do a diff on it as well. It should show all of these. Just pick like and under edits, just pick the first one and I'll do a diff just the last time. Okay, JSON node. I did remove the JSON serializer options from get value because, as we talked about last time, we're going to do very simple conversions and we're not going to do any kind of deserialized work. We could change that in the future, but for now, like another typo on a property indexer, key to property name. One of the discussions last time was changing terminology. In this case, I looked at JSON document and I changed everything to parse, like JSON document. So they don't have any UTF postfix notation. It's just parse, parse, parse. And then I removed 2 methods.
Steve Tobe, your keyboard is very loud.
Really? It says I'm muted.
I muted you.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Okay, any questions so far? Okay, JSON object also had the factory pattern applied. And can you scroll down a little bit? And based on some previous work on a different prototype that we had, I pulled in some sample code and I found that it was very convenient to be able to pass a key value pair directly into the add method before it was explicitly implemented through iCollection. So I removed that, and that comes in handy, as well as a constructor that takes a bunch of key value pairs. That was also in the previous prototype, and after looking through some of the samples, it was very convenient in certain cases. Okay, on JSON value, I believe the only major thing was I added a private protected constructor. I think I could probably, do I actually need that anymore since it's abstract? Yeah, I do, okay. And the biggest thing was JSON value of t got removed. So we added the, you think here, what did we do here? We added, well, I'm just looking at the try get value change. looks like we added another.
Oh, looks like you just
removed, yeah.
got rid of the options, I think.
Right. So yeah, and that's all. That's basically what we talked about last time, plus a couple additional things that came up since then.
Feels like it's all things we talked about before to me. Does anybody have anything else to fill the gap?
So this is planning on going into preview 4, and we expect some feedback on it. If there's some usability feedback around adding additional overloads, we can do that at that point. But I do think it's important to get into preview 4 sooner than later, or get into preview 4.
Yeah, I guess.
That
pull this over
currently
here.
looks right. I can't think of anything else that I haven't looked at from last time.
All seems, reasonable to me.
Stefan's got a question in the chat.
Yeah, do you want JSON-node.tryparse? Is that a scenario where you might have a potentially valid JSON node?
Well, the question is, if we do that for stream, what do you want it to do? If it returns
No, it would
false,
only
the
be-
stream's been destroyed.
I would only do it for stream. Or maybe read-only span of byte. Yeah, if you assume UTF-8, that'd probably be fine.
I guess the one I want is up here.
Yeah, JSON document has try parse on the reader.
Well, yeah, I think we have it on JSON document. It's only for when it takes a ref UTF-8 JSON reader, right? And that's that the reader is in an incomplete state. Is the only case that it returns false. Like if the reader has an error. So I guess the other question is, what do you want try-parse to do? Because on JSON document, if it's invalid JSON, try-parse still throws. If it's I couldn't find the end of the current element because the reader was in the incomplete sequence mode, then that's the only case that it returns false. So I don't think we need it here, unless we care about that same state for the JSON reader.
It could easily be added later.
Right.
If we need.
So, all right. Sounds like I get to push these buttons.
Okay, thank you.
This was quick.
All right, Emo, you want to do all the iLogger roundup that you promised to do?
Yeah, I'm just following the thread.
Thank you, Steve.
Who wants to do the summary of this?
I'll do it. Okay. Seems like David and Saurabh are not on the meeting, but I can go ahead anyways. I also have a link to like the latest design doc that has a bunch of samples in it. For whomever's doing the screen share, they can keep that tab open if just in case. We
Right.
that I wanted to share the samples.
Am I looking for the chat? Yes.
Yeah, I sent it.
One of the fun complexities of hosting the stream is the chat is the hardest thing for you to see. But I got it. All right.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start. So what we chatted about last time when we did the API review, a bunch of this document already was covered. So we talked about the background in case that like there was already 2 approaches to doing logging using a bunch of log information, log warning APIs that are in the first sample code. The second snippet you're looking at uses these action uses another API in logging called logger message define. There's a bunch of overloads there depending on in your message templates when you're trying to do logging how many arguments you need to pass down, then you would use different define APIs over there. And the aim for this feature that we're looking at is to see if we can kind of use source generators to maybe reduce some boilerplate code and like do other things on the side as well, like make sure that people use the right approach, like make sure people use the more performant APIs for logging, and like some diagnostics as well. And I guess so I'm trying to skim through the goals to see if I missed anything in terms of goals. So I think it's just basically just a little bit further up before the API proposal. Let me see.
One thing I want to add is that the original goal of this feature was to simplify the second pattern. Scroll up.
Which is the second code
pattern, right? Yep.
So the source generator would in the implementation would be able to use these define APIs under the hood, but it's not limited to doing that. It could do other things as well. And in fact, there are some limitations that this logger message define has. For example, I'll just point to 2 that says you can't provide dynamic logging with them, like directly, or what's the other one? A bunch of things that the source generator would be able to do as a top up. Okay, actually, I remember now. Like, you can pass down at most 6 arguments in your message templates today. That can go up to 16 if we add more overloads, but not more. But under the hood with the source generator, we could, rather than using logger message define APIs, use some other implementation to cover arbitrary number of, parameters when we're doing logging. Okay, so we talked about goals as well, and I'll go with the API itself. So in the one that you're just showing here, logger message attribute would basically be the only thing that would need to be added for this thing to work. I can go over the 2 constructors, why you need both, and all of that, or I can go through that through samples first.
That would be better because the
Samples?
attribute, I think the attribute is probably a slam dunk once we.
Okay. So so there's a ton of samples. If we scroll down, we can look at it, probably any of them. So we start here. This one shows the code so the first snippet shows a sample usage. So the first one says logging sample 3. You see the usage of logger message attribute on top of log name. You put it on top of a partial method on a partially implemented class. That's all the user would need to write down, and then the rest would be auto-generated. And the code snippet that was shown after it shows what gets generated. Right in the middle shows what gets generated. But this is a simple case. And as I said earlier, if there's like more than what define APIs can cover, the code generation looks slightly different, and we will be also auto-generating some structs.
Well, so to add to that, I think we should, as part of the API review, approve the overloads up to 16 for define. That way we don't have to change the code gen depending on number of arguments.
That will cover up to 16, and then for the cases where there are more, then there would be less code that needs to get auto-generated. Like, there would be less cases for...
If people have more than 16 arguments, I would just fail. But sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you have 16 arguments, what are you doing?
So yeah,
I think
I think 16 is the magic number with BCL or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be like a super special case to have more, and like probably more likely to have bugs.
No. So yeah, so it would be covered. Yeah, so we could either fail, or I mean, give error, or if we wanted to support it, it's possible without needing to add any extra APIs aside from that logger message attribute. And we can go over more samples. The first sample is for an instance method. Yeah, and then the second one, the third snippet, yeah, right here is for using static class, adding a method on a static class. Not much more added to that. We can move to the next topic here. The next topic here just mentions that due to the fact that iLogger already in our logging framework takes those bunch of arguments, it takes log level, it takes event ID and all of that. It takes also, like, let's say exception. Therefore, there is this code sample I wanted to show that, like, the one that says below works, the other one, and then that says but this warns. I just wanted to point out to the fact that if someone wanted to have exceptions in their message templates themselves, the first exception would actually be what we pass down to our logger message, to our log. But then the second one is what will show up in the message. Just wanted to point that out. Just checking the messages on Teams.
Yep.
Yeah, the team. Exactly. Okay. And then moving on to options, the source generator could allow us to have Pascal casing of arguments. And I showcased the example here where the logger message attribute in the sample has two arguments, city and province. And then when you see the output console, the city and province are uppercase.
I will say one thing today. Today, in define, the actual names of the templates are completely decoupled from the arguments being passed in, since we use string that format, and the order matters, not the actual names. I think one thing that is currently, I think today this thing does name matching, but in theory, order is what matters.
Order of city first and province second.
So if you were to swap those two arguments and put province first in the string and city last, and then the arguments were city and province in the actual function, it wouldn't line up today, at least in the implementation. It wouldn't line up city and province with the actual named arguments.
I think in the source, I think I tried.
It does.
Yeah. Be fine. Yeah.
So that is different from how the define API works at runtime compared to the source generator. I'm not saying which one's better, just saying that is a difference today.
Maybe so the next example also shows that where the order of arguments do not matter. In this case, yeah. Even iLogger goes to that last in this sample. Exception 2, exception 3, and then in the message template you see exception 3 and 2 exist in the message template, but obviously the first exception, as I said earlier, is the one that gets supplied by the ilogger.log API, not by the message. And we can move on to the next set of samples here. Another thing I wanted to point out, so these three, I don't know how useful the first one is that says log with custom event name, but that already is possible. So like if that's not specified, I believe the event name will be the name of the log method itself, as opposed to you providing event name directly as custom event.
It is important because to retrofit old logs, you need to be able to specify the event name. It's not to not break that part of the contract. The event name and ID are part of the public API for logs, so people can basically filter on those as a consumer of logs.
And yeah, so that's that. And then the second one showcasing the log with dynamic log level. And when we checked in this PR of this design doc, there was a question about why would someone need to do dynamic log level support, and one use case is when log level is actually supplied through config. I guess that's the answer to why we might want to have this. And then the third example is using format specifier, just showing a sample of a case where we're using format specifiers, and then the output to the logging, you'll see how it shows. So the last one says logging example 20, value is 1.2345, whatever. If there's no questions, we can scroll a bit further down, and this is just the same log APIs, one with the JSON format, the other one was not much to it, but we could take a look at those diagnostics. I have that gist, a link to that gist, if you wanted to look further at if we like those diagnostics. But before going there, let's see if there's more to this document. Event ID uniqueness checks. The source generator also will be able to do uniqueness of event ID checks. That's not today. The library authors might reuse and not notice. And the scope for this is if some of these log methods are defined in the same class, the source generator would be able to kind of send the diagnostic message. That's like the scope of it. Because we talked about this last time in the API review. And one Q&A about the source generator is that someone asked about why are we enforcing to provide event IDs if the existing log methods, logging APIs allow, some of them allow the users to just skip providing one. Maybe in the future we could kind of make logger message attributes allow it to, not users to not necessarily provide event IDs, and that would just help app developers more so than it does library authors if they want to kind of not care about event IDs at all.
So is the name required now? Since we aren't going to generate a message for you, it's required now, right?
Event ID is required.
But also the message?
The message template?
Yeah. Is that required too?
Okay, so I think that's up for discussion. I think if some message, I think it would be easier if it's not allowed to have no message template.
Right. So if it isn't required and we don't do anything by default, like console will just log a blank or a toString of the actual, I don't know, object or something.
Can you repeat that? please?
So we either have to require it or we have to have a good default. And I think there's no good default for the message itself.
Right, yeah. So then if we wanted to provide default messages, then the question would be, how should the default message template look like when it's not specified? Then like earlier in the design, I guess, we wanted to have JSON blobs generated.
Right.
I put that out, but like we could instead decide to have a comma separated set of property, what's it called? Those parameters, comma separated. But if there's actually no parameters specified either, then the message would actually be empty.
I think it should just be required.
Okay.
I
Is
think
that
it's
what
fair
it
to
is
say
for
we
logger.define?
considered. Sorry, Stefan. I think it's fair to say we considered it. There's no reasonable default for a format string, so now we made it mandatory.
Yeah.
And we don't like break ourselves into jail on how we're going to figure out how to intelligently format this.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. I'll make sure to explain that. Note it. And
Is the message required to include all of the parameters that have been specified in the log call? Is an error to not do that?
one more time, sorry.
I'm wondering, in your example, like log name, it's taking 2 arguments. It's taking string name and exception, but the message only includes name. That's valid?
Yeah, if the person who's sharing the screen, if they scroll up to the ordering section, actually just right here, exactly right here, when it says below works but this one warns, and the snippet above it shows our existing iLogger API. So it says public partial. So that takes exception, for example. So if the logger message attributes doesn't provide any exception at all, then it's passed down as null. But if they do provide one, the first one is actually the sentence there I wrote down is, therefore a general rule, the first instance of iLogger log level exception are treated especially in the log method as signature. Subsequent instances are treated like normal arguments to the message template.
Right.
I think that was a poor example because exception is part of the logging API.
Right.
I think Stephen's question was, should the number of named holes match the parameters, excluding exception? And
Right.
the answer to that is yes.
Okay. So it would be an error if, in general, it didn't.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Actually, today it throws at runtime.
So it is an error. We just don't tell you.
Right.
Well, it's an error when you
Wait, what's
call
an
a
error
defined
last time?
message with the wrong number of parameters.
Today, today, if you call a define message and you don't specify the actual argument, it'll throw.
Yeah, I think I noticed that.
But yeah, but the generator would have to do this, presumably specially to.
Yep.
And so that's.
So okay, I took note of the fact that we want the log message to be required, right?
Yeah, and if you said like name in the string template and you didn't have a name argument, or you didn't have the same number of arguments as you did holes, it should give you a squiggle.
But I guess there's 2 questions. I was actually asking the opposite of what you just said, David. I just want to make sure I heard correctly. If I said hello name as my message template, but I didn't have a string name argument to my method, obviously that should error, because where is name going to come from? What about the inverse? If my message template was just hello, but I had a string name, that should also error, right?
That should, yeah, it should.
Or at least warn.
It could warn, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know you would want to do placeholder counting, because it seems like it would be valid to, if you had something formatted in 2 different ways using the colon format syntax. So it feels like you want to target by name, but maybe I'm overthinking things and doing it by count is just easier.
So one question, I wonder you want to talk about this now or later, but like last time we said there's this new message builder, string builder interpolation C# feature, and how does this interact with that? And
So that's the following of the document. Yep, we can go over that. And I think this is, if you scroll a bit up to the start of the document, to the start of the section, I just wanted to check. Okay, so let's just go over it. All that we looked at so far was with the usage of logger message attribute. And this section just kind of trying to understand what we would need to do to be able to use the builder, and you'll see that if, let's say, if some, rather than writing the logger message attribute, we could be writing public static void log name, and then like using that string interpolation hello name in the, you know, I mean,
I just want 1 second to interject.
yeah,
Before we go into the gory details of how you would use the new string builders,
Mhm.
the conclusion was that there is value added by using string builders. That's something we can look at supporting, but they're not like mutually exclusive. Like doing the source generator doesn't preclude us from doing it.
That's kind of where I was getting it, because like I was reading it earlier, so that's the conclusion I took away from that as well. Basically, you're saying the attribute still adds a lot of value because it's a very concise form, and there might be some gains we can have by using the builder, but they're not, user experience wise, it's not equivalent to tell people to use the new form builders, basically. Yeah.
And they're also not exclusive. Like the generated code could later change to use like the builder under the
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah.
Said another way, the conclusion was there are benefits. There are essentially pros and cons to both, and so you and some of the cons for the source generator are things that are deemed, because they're not currently supported with that approach, are deemed as P0s for the what is trying to be exposed. And then some of the things that it enables that the source generator approach doesn't are nice to haves, but not P0s. And so the decision was made to go with the source generator approach.
So what is
David and Sharab and Mariam, did I say that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Can you summarize what the cons are for the logger message attribute-based solution?
That's done.
The big one. The big one that I've been pushing for with the source generator is, with the builder provides, is if you weren't using it, let's say that rather, well, I'll use an example that I've been using from ASP.NET. So ASP.NET has this certificate manager event source, and in .NET 5, we shipped .NET 5 with calls to like, you know, certificates found is the event that was being called, and it was being passed an argument describe certificates, method call passing in the certificate collection, which was doing a crap ton of work. And that call wasn't guarded in any way with one of these logging enabled things.
In fact, that sample is lower down in this document.
Okay, cool. And currently with the source generator approach, like you would probably write your log method to take a string certificates description, and so the call site would still contain, just like the ASP.NET example would contain describe certificates method call, and then the caller would need to remember to add the guard around the translation to avoid doing all that work if it wasn't enabled. With the builder approach, that's kind of built in, so you could still write the code as sort of your two-liner, and you wouldn't have to add the guard because it's implicit to the build. The builder ends up doing it for you. But flipping this around, what the builder doesn't provide, there are a few things. One, the main thing I think is there are a bunch of things that you can, or there are a variety of things that you can do in message templates, even just the message template syntax, and that was kind of a P0 to support it. The message template syntax is not exactly the same as the C# syntax, and it allows you to specify things like the name of the hole, which might be different from the thing that you passed in at the hole, which we don't currently have a way of doing in C#.
Gotcha.
Right.
Sorry, and I only jumped in there, Mariam, because I know I was pushing hard for one, so I wanted to, do both justice.
No, thank you for that. I just wanted the screen to show the example while we were explaining it. Thank you. Then I think we might have covered everything in the document. We talked about the the benefits of the builder, and then as you're looking at the doc, there's, I don't know, did we cover? So those bullet points you see down are one, overall benefits of the source generator, and then the bottom down is just a little comparison between what it will have on top of using define today without anything. So let's just look at that. So obviously shorter and simpler syntax than the current approach being logger, the second sample in this document. Guided developer experiences because there are a bunch of diagnostics that come over with it, and support for arbitrary number of logging parameters. And we mentioned even if we don't support that, it's fine too. But I mean, as part of this, I wanted to link another API review that just tries to add more overloads to define, up to 16 rather than 6. And that will, I'll link it right after this, but dynamic log level we already talked about, and then Pascal casing we also talked about. I have this if there's any questions. Otherwise, I don't have anything else to add.
I think capping out at 16 makes sense. I mean, I don't know where our functions and actions are tapping out, but I think that is about 16. I mean, quite frankly, if you have more than 6, you're probably in trouble. But like, we have to pick some number, so whatever
I just pasted a link to the issue. It's just.
It's so the only API service you're adding is the attribute, right?
It is actually. And I think I don't know if Eric St. John is on the meeting, but I think he mentioned we wanted to add this to as a package, either as a package or just add it to the framework.
Right. So for the first go, it'll go into the existing extensions logging package, and then we're determining where these source generators which extend the framework ship, whether it be in the SDK or in the targeting pack. So if it's the SDK, then it would go into the .NET SDK or potentially the Web SDK. If it's in the targeting pack, it would go into the ASP.NET targeting pack, since that includes this component. And even if we did that, it would still sim ship in the NuGet package, just like think of it as just like very much parallel to the way we ship the reference assemblies. So I don't think we need to. I mean, there's the option of treating it as a separately addressable thing, like the source generator itself as standalone, but I don't think that that's very meaningful, and it creates other complications around like having to deal with the generator being present but not the API you need, and vice versa.
So per our conversation earlier today, Eric, the way we'd ship would make it very difficult for someone to see the attribute but not have the generator in place.
Yes. And that's for the most part the case with all the things with the ones that we're planning to ship. However, we still want to iron out, if possible, we'd love it if we could come up with a way to provide the attribute, and that it was impossible to have this generator without the type. That would be nice, but at the moment we don't really have a good way to do that.
This one really showcases the problem in that scenario. Right? Because it's a partial void method, and if that doesn't get filled out by the generator, you're not logging anymore.
Well, no, won't the compiler emit if you have a partial method that's not defined? Oh no, you're right. The compiler
partial void though.
Yeah, you're right. So this does. So this is a case where without the generator, your API does nothing. Yeah.
Partial private void, to be clear.
Is that the syntax that I suggested partial extern for? The mandatory partials?
I don't remember.
Okay, did mandatory partials get added?
So if it's a non-private method or a non-void returning method or has any ref parameters, it is a required partial.
So
who's deciding the visibility on these? The developer? I know in the example on the bottom of the screen it says public partial void, but if I only call it from inside my method, if I change it to private,
then that's when
Can
it
I
becomes
change
a optional partial, and you would hit the it got deleted case if the generator didn't run.
Yes.
Okay, but if you say public or internal or any access modifier, it'll possibly other than private, it will. If there was no body found, then the compile fails.
So
that is correct.
Okay.
I have some spicy hot takes on this whole thing. So a couple of things that are in the same vein as what Eric was saying. Shipping it in the package, I think, is a must because this thing is decoupled from any framework. Putting it in both is fine as long as we know how that works. The other thing that is a wrinkle is the whole idea of targeting down level versions or frameworks. This came up discussing with IC3 and teams. They want to use this since they built it. I don't know what it would mean or if we even want to support the source generator working for older levels of the library. My default answer is like no, like you need to have at least a 6.0 package for logging. But that leaves them in a tough spot where they basically had ideas to be able to backfill the types that weren't there by genning them at runtime. But it kind of goes to the point of today, if you were trying to generate newer C# code that depended on APIs that weren't in the framework you were targeting, you could define them yourself. So you can use like record syntax in older libraries or net standard libraries by defining some structs. The question is, do we want to enable that here as well?
Sorry, like I think you're talking about C# specific types that the C# compiler requires, right? But
yeah,
like, why I can't use the logging library on an older version of the framework?
You can. We just don't even recommend that. Is all. You can today use logging 6.0 on Net Core app 3.1. That works fine.
I mean, it's right?
It is, yeah. It is.
So like, I mean, you would have to go out of our way to make it not work, basically, right? So they get it effectively.
Yeah. It does
I think
work.
David is suggesting a different thing though, because a lot of time people don't want to take.
Right.
Azure Functions is a good example where they don't want to take the new packages, the new runtime assemblies, because it puts them in a different servicing band, or they need to unify the types. In the case of Azure Functions, they need to unify the types with the host. And so they wouldn't even take the new package version. So if we wanted to enable that, we would have to provide a way to ship the source generator on its own to run with an older library.
Right.
And I don't want to start going that way. I mean, I would say if we needed to do certain things inside the build of the new libraries to make it easier to have a minimal reference.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's just extensions logging, an extension, like maybe one single package reference, and that lets you take the 6.0. 6.0 is LTS. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know. It's more. I think we maybe discouraged it in the past, just because it hoists those DLLs out of the shared framework and their dependencies. So you end up deploying, your 6.0 build, your 6.0 binaries with your 3.0 runtime, which isn't bad because it's net standard, but we don't spend any time thinking about that scenario.
I mean, I would generally say like fundamental libraries like this one, I think it's fine. Like we already designed it for immutable and the metadata reader, and yes,
exactly.
in cases where this breaks, but I mean, what's the worst that can happen for the customer? They tell them, oh, you're running on NetCore app 3.1 and you're in a weird configuration, get to .NET 6. I mean,
okay.
We can probably ship a new version of the package if we broke something spectacular, but if they lifted themselves in a super weird combo, yeah. I would say, like, I would rather not support that, because the problem becomes, if we start shipping the generators kind of like on top of this, now you're creating this other multi-dimensional puzzle where, as long as we don't need new API surface to support the generator, it's fine. But if you need a new method or something, then it's just not worth it, in my opinion.
Got it. Yeah, because I was almost going to suggest maybe we need a pattern like how the C# compiler can detect what version of the runtime features are available. What's it called? The runtime feature, that type.
Yeah.
It's like, do you support, like, we have that pattern for source generators, and we're like, okay, can you detect what version you're targeting? Therefore, gen different code.
Well, it could see the API existence based on what the compiler's already loaded into the universe.
Yeah.
So you would know if you had a defined message that took 17 generic type arguments.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the generator basically gets to see everything. It also gets to see even things like the TFM, so you can also base it on that.
Oh, it sees TFMs too? Okay, interesting.
Yeah, like there's certain properties that we pass from MS Build to the.
You want to look at TFMs here.
And now you get to
don't conflate.
Try understanding the TFM graph. So don't look at the TFMs.
Well, I mean, you get that information. I'm not saying you should base your cogen on that, but I mean, there are cases where you want to, for example, have diagnostics based on TFM, right? You're taking something down level. Don't do that, right? Like, there's certain things that you can actually detect if you wanted to. But I would honestly just say, if people want to use the generator, they have to upgrade the library from whatever it is to the 6.0 version.
Just like if they wanted any other new feature.
Exactly.
Okay. Consensus reached.
Okay, so logger message attribute.
Yeah, so I was just trying something. I'm actually surprised that optional parameters work for attributes, but apparently it works just fine.
Well, but I think the consensus was message became a required parameter. So.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Might change this. This is the proposal is for when message is optional.
Yeah, and then
so you would make message be non-nullable, non-optional, and move level to be the last argument in the first constructor.
I haven't tried it out yet, but without having tried it, I think that's what I was thinking. But if in the since this is preview, would we be able to change it?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't like message being in the middle, but I think it makes sense to have them in the same order. So is there a way to do this that's not that? Like, can we use...
What does log level default to? Information?
What is default? Is there a default?
I think default. I'm not sure.
Right? If you don't spec, is that what it is?
Or that the generator fails if you didn't have it as a method parameter or something.
There's no default. There's none. There's trace, debug information, warning, error, critical, and none.
So what is it?
There has to be a
just
level.
Get rid of the second constructor?
Yeah, level is required.
The second constructor is for when it's not specified. We will use dynamic. The log method will take.
Yes.
We'll have to require log level.
Right. So for methods that have the log level as a parameter.
The one thing to keep in mind is that we might want to make event ID optional in the future. That's like a ask we got from app developers, because the current logging APIs don't require an event ID. We're trying to force best practices, but I have a feeling we might get arm twisted.
Maybe later, yeah.
What does that like? So what does that look like if we add things that are required?
I mean, one option, just talking things out, is you don't have any constructor parameters, and and then the generator just yells at people arbitrarily of, I'm sorry, you need to give me an event ID, until it, supports not doing that. But
I kind of prefer that, to be honest.
I mean, Jeremy, just because you mean no parameters, constructor, and settable properties?
Yeah, so you do.
I predict Fred is going to say something about the new C# feature. Go ahead, Fred.
Man, how am I so predictable? To add more new C# features into this discussion, and to be clear, I'm not 100% certain that this is going to make 10. I really want it to make 10, but I can't be certain. Is that we're going to be adding the ability to say that properties are required to be set. And so at that point, I would expect that you could potentially expose a parameterless constructor and mark a property as required, and then the compiler just won't let you compile if you haven't set the property. But
Presumably without that, sorry, go ahead.
But like I can't. I don't know if we should be designing this like assuming that that's going to happen, because I can't guarantee it.
Presumably without that, though, the analyzer or the generator would basically do the equivalent, and it would ensure that it would warn or error if you haven't set the things that needed set.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, especially it'd be the case if you ended up with two dependent things in the future, right? You specified, the event name, but you didn't specify something that's required once you specify the event name. Like, hey, this is an invalid combination, which, yes, we could also do with formal constructors, but
right. I mean, I'm just thinking of the log level example. The generator is the only thing that knows that you need to set the log level on the attribute if it hasn't been specified in the signature, and vice versa, whereas the compiler couldn't.
Yeah. And
the only downside of not having a constructor is that, of course, it makes it more verbose, right? Instead of just passing the argument, you have to say property name equals and then the argument, right?
It does. I mean, I think part of the ordering here is this looks cleaner to me than the log level being so far from the event ID, which would be if we moved the message one position instead of two. And I can definitely see people saying that the event name and event ID should be the things on the left, so they're what you quickly see in the code, and the message is that's a detail. And so that they want the more left compact information, and if it's all just set the properties, you can order them any way you want.
Yeah,
that's the best bet, to be honest.
I mean, but write that syntax, right? Because once you put in the property names, it's getting quite verbose, right? So it's your argument of making it more left-like is not sure that holds necessarily.
And debug is log level.debug.
Yeah, I didn't know what the words were.
Yeah, although reading it's not that bad.
Any opinions, anyone? Anyone?
I mean, I think it's the most... Given that you're a generator...
Yeah.
And you may end up with... and the things of, the level is required if it wasn't specified in the signature, it's probably the most flexible. If you come up with some complicated way of doing default messages in the future, even that would go back to being optional. And yeah, I would probably just do everything as get set and then have the generator fail. Personally.
Yeah, +1 for me. Anyone else can.
Even event ID? Or are we saying that the generator will flag if you don't have event ID set?
Yep.
What I heard is that right now you have to pass it in, but they may want to make it optional in the future. So right now it would fail when you don't specify, but in the future when it's optional, you no longer have to specify. But the syntax is obvious at that point. If we want to make it optional for the constructors, we have to add overloads.
Are we giving up on event name by using attributes more? Are people just going to stop specifying that because you can't do new event ID?
With event, did you say event name?
Yeah, it's a part of event ID, right? Like it was never required. I'm just
Provide
wondering
an
if this
event
was.
name. You can provide event name as well.
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Right
if,
now we have it inferred from the method name, so we're not giving up on it.
I see. Okay, I missed that.
It's event ID that we don't do any like automatic generation.
All right, so it sounds like
Why make them set and not an int?
because I think of things in terms of the C# that shipped with Framework 4.5. I'm old.
I mean, for attributes, does it really matter?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, you're using a word that the language added in the last 5 years. I don't know about it.
Well, isn't init basically saying it's required?
No, it's that you can't set it after the object initializer.
Yes.
Oh,
So it's optional, but can't be late.
yeah, right. The question is more for you. Like, what should attributes do? Should they all be marked init now or not?
I would kind of expect them to just be init because like you're not setting it later. Oh.
Did init get?
Does it mess up downstream?
Does init have a mod rec, or is it a mod
Oh,
opt?
that's the point. Actually, it's a mod rec.
Yeah, so set.
Yeah.
Does it mess up downstream like if I used it on Net Framework? What happens?
It, what target framework is this library targeting?
Standard tool.
It's everything.
Don't use init. Don't use init. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the message property, I thought I heard it was required. Is it not?
It is, yeah.
Again,
Oh,
if we move everything
I
to
see.
lazy, like
Yeah,
you
I
have
see.
to call the setter, then technically the description of the thing is after the constructor, this message property is null. So
Yeah, that's fair.
really no one's gonna. We don't expect people to really instantiate the attribute and look at it. At least I assume that the generator is going to use the compiler attribute DOM view instead of the
Right.
evaluate code and see what happens. So
The nullable annotations on here are kind of meaningless because it's the generator that's validating them. No user code is ever going to be querying these things.
yeah.
Well, the only question I have there, right? If it's string question, then it appears logical that you should be able to set in. You should be able to say message equals null.
Yeah, and then the generator will yell at
warn
you
you about
and
that.
say it doesn't like that.
Sure. But I don't know. I guess the other thing is again, theoretically we could make this message not null and not have any warnings if we had.
I mean, we could also
the future C# feature.
do
but
that.
may or may not happen. We could do that, yeah.
Oh, and it could be non-null, and I mean, you don't even need that. You could just make message be a non-nullable string, and the constructor instantiates sets it to empty string.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. The less you have to write an analyzer for, the better.
Well.
All right. So there, something somewhere said something option Pascal case something.
Okay.
Is that a global setting for the generator, or is that supposed to be on the per message?
For the first one you said.
Okay, so it's just a generator configuration setting, not a.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the way we want it to be? I mean, we can always add the support later, but I'm just the nullable boolean of Pascal case identifiers, or whatever we would want to call it. If you didn't specify it, it'd be used the global setting, and if you did, then it would be used the local setting. But if you don't have a use case, then maybe it's not important.
I think David asked for this to be true by default.
Which one? The skip check?
Pass
Yeah.
filter.
That should be on by default.
Right. The question is, should it also be part of this attribute? Should we be able to tweak it
No.
per control, or is it just a global thing?
Global.
All right. So for 36022, the only thing it's talking about is the attribute, right?
Yes.
Okay. So does anybody have further feedback on that?
Are we going to review the define overload separately?
If we're gonna do it separately, it's the last tab I see open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's simply not like, if this is
Cool.
the only thing being talked about here, like we won't say we had a 2-item agenda. Like it's
cool.
Just
Sounds
the 36022 also, I don't know if the generator error messages and warnings are considered part of the public API surface.
We didn't look at them. Yeah. So there's 20 of them here, but like if we think any of them are too specific, we can drop them.
I remember I did have a question. So being the person who wrote the appendix that talks about naming styles and that you should use an underscore for instance fields, we're assuming both a name and a style for this, and of the logger field for discovery. I'm fine with that, but should the attribute support what is the name of my logger, or do you want a type level? What is the name of my logger instance, or are you finding it by declared type or what?
It's defined. Okay, I think I forgot to mention that it was one of the feedbacks last time. It's not discovered by name. It's discovered by there has to be one field. If there's 2, it will not like it. If there's 0, it will not like it. So.
Okay.
Can the field be on a base class?
No.
It has to be a field on this specific class.
Do you mind searching for fields here? I think it has to be covered here fully.
Looking at available fields, you get an error if there's not the right type or if there's more than one. Yep.
Right above that, usage examples.
Does not look at the inheritance hierarchy, could in the future.
Like the scenario there being, say I had a controller in my ASP.NET app, and I have like my base controller that has the logger, and everybody derives from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not. That's a good example.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be too hard to wire up the feature.
Right. If we want to scope it for now and maybe add it later, that's fine.
Fred, does Rosalind just? It would already tell you that there's a field if it was a protected field from a base class as part of your scope in discovery, right?
Yes.
I think.
I don't remember if you can shadow it.
I think maybe one thing would be if the base, like if were we talking about cross-assembly references as well last week, and decided to make it simpler so that the iLogger field would be only discoverable. That would be one of the reasons why we want it to be discoverable only as a field for this class itself.
I don't know. I mean, like, it seems easy enough to make it work. If there's a technical reason why it doesn't work in the first version, then like fixing it is goodness, right? So
other things to test would be like automatic properties that it works. However,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so the logging instance will be discovered. It's not assuming a name anymore. Okay.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so you can't start with an underscore for reasons. I don't care.
Yeah. Next one says don't include a template for that since it's explicitly taken care of.
Right. This is the anything that was a special parameter if you see it in the message,
Exactly.
you'll complain.
Exactly.
You have opinions about parameter names. Why can't they be in nested types? I guess just a generator limitation if you don't feel like dealing with it for now.
Well, yeah. Okay, the fourth one you can skip it. It's very let's skip the fourth one. Yeah.
Duplicate ID.
Yes.
They have to be void.
Mm-hmm.
Arguments must be an ilogger.
Yeah, so it's not providing ilogger for the instance method. It has to be provided. Actually, wait, let me think.
Static.
Yeah, statics for static. For static, it has to be provided.
What, you don't want to look for static fields? Yeah, that's fine.
And then the next one is you did provide a logger, so it's like, well, now you got to be static.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So it's not logging methods must be static. It's logging methods that take a logger must be static.
That's right.
Because instance ones will find it off the. Okay. I was like, that doesn't seem to match what we were doing with field discovery.
Mm-hmm. Which number are you at?
9. They have to be partial.
Yes.
16 you shouldn't need to do, because once you say it has to be partial, then I think the C# compiler will yell at you if you're both partial and have a body.
I wonder if there are cases where 16 might happen without partial. So like you provide partial, but you still provide the the definition, the body. So
I guess that you elsewhere had the definition already. Okay.
So starting with source generators, the compiler now allows you to have partial methods with bodies and partial methods that are that have access specifiers.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you could always have partial methods with bodies. You have one that has a body and one that doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the I found a body before I generated it.
Yes.
Which is probably better than you just generate it and then the compile fails because it found 2 bodies. So, because it points out where the error, like what you did wrong instead of what bad state you're in. So yeah, it's reasonable. They can't be generic for reasons.
What are you going to do with the generic argument?
Presumably you could log the T. Like you could be M1 of T that took a T val.
It's already like you can already provide different types. I don't know, like maybe there's a restriction.
Well, this is like if I had a thing that I wanted to say like log dot invalid value of T. It's whatever T I give in. I just want the toString to be logged with the same message of I received an invalid value and here's the T that I got, or here's the value I got.
The concern wouldn't be a case where you had a concrete type and wanted to pass it as a generic. It would be a case where you were in a generic method or in a generic type and wanted to pass in a value that you only had strongly typed as T.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you could just make it object in that case, but then you can't call members off of it.
I guess the concern there would be, and I'm assuming this is why it's not supported, is if you want structured, strongly typed logging, the fact that the same log message with the same log ID might have a different type as a particular argument, a different type would be very strange.
You'll also need to consider the case when you're in a generic type, right? Because this is a generic method. But what if I'm in a generic type and I take a type parameter from the containing type?
Right. But again, I think the reason you're saying that would also need to be an error frame.
If you're going to error on one, then you should error on both.
They should both be errors, I presume.
Or both be fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, but it's if you're going for a structured logging approach, it's not clear to me what it means for the argument to differ in type every time it's called.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know what the, I am totally a number static interface for math is going to look like, but with the current definition where we don't have those, I can certainly see somebody wanting to use the same ID for I received an invalid value, whether it be an int or a long or a uint or a double or a float, of like, well, especially if I'm using JSON, they're all number in the end. So I want them all to be the same ID. They're just an invalid value was provided. But you can suppress the warning on you repeated the message ID, I guess.
I'll take note of your example.
Yeah. Anyway, it just felt I was surprised. But if you are going to error on this one, then take the note on that Fred pointed out that you could be in a generic type already.
Okay.
A warning detecting that you used a log level word.
Okay, so this is what's the word? Opinionated. So if someone actually is logging with info level, would it make sense for them to actually have the name info in their message template as well? Maybe they made a mistake, so that's why the warning is popping up. But it's not that important either. So.
I mean, it could be, that it's internet news from Oregon, and that it had nothing to do with the logging level. I can acronym like nobody's business. So, I mean, as a warning, you could turn it off. It to me, it feels unnecessary. If it's a thing that you think people have gotten wrong before and they seem confused as to how to fix it, then maybe it's worthwhile. But
I think the R9 team has happened to have those ones, and then it helped with them. But it doesn't mean that for our framework we might need it anyways, because so we can remove that.
I mean, we have like the R9 thing is actually a good experiment, right? Like we have a team big enough using it at scale, and they've seen people get this wrong. So
yeah, like if we feel it has value, especially as a maybe you just want a generator setting of I guess you would just put no warn in your project file. Don't tell me about the 11s. Yeah, so 12 definitely feels weird to me, because if you're doing something like logging why you're rejecting a certificate, and you're rejecting because, and here's the validity date that I'm rejecting it because of, you're going to get the warning of you put in a date time that's probably not right.
What does the full message say on line 84? No need to supply. Oh, implicitly.
Yeah.
It implicitly does datetime now.
Yeah, so really this would be, you would want an analyzer that would warn if you're calling a logger message method with datetime now, datetime UTC now, or any of the other things that would automatically convert into or from one of those.
But any other datetime should be totally valid.
Yeah. Like, user has not logged on since blank, deleting their account. Like, that's a totally valid datetime to log. And it would be weird to suppress. To me, it feels opinionated and,
noisy?
Yeah.
Also noisy?
Noisy. That's the word. So again, I can see where it's useful, but somebody looking at their log, if they were logging now, and you didn't have an analyzer specifically looking for that call pattern, because it's about the caller, not the message, they'd be like, oh, I see that at 10:02:21 we logged the time is 10:02:20. Why do we have this timestamp twice? Oh, because we put it as part of the message and it's part of the infrastructure. Okay, let's go fix the message. Like, that, to me, that seems a very obvious discoverable thing, and that you don't need help with that. That it's probably wrong more than it is right.
I was going to say, you have at least me convinced. I think we should take this out.
Okay.
Fred has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a lot of the same thing, of that this feels like a particularly noisy, a noisy warning that is very likely to be wrong. And what's the worst that happens if you have the date twice in the log? No.
Yeah, same as I felt about info, but if that one was found to be, helpful and it's only looking at the beginning instead of anywhere in your log, then I can buy the argument on the info and more.
What's this, the 12? Okay.
So 13 is just like the log level one, only this is the exception.
It is, yes. Don't include this in the example. And 14. Okay.
Well, yeah. So 13 is about I'm a magic parameter that you may not realize. So that one I see where it has value.
Just like log level. There was another one above log.
Yeah, it was, I think.
And it's always like the first exception in the signature, right? It's nothing to do with the name. It's the first one from the left that we see.
It is the first one, yes.
Okay. Same for log level. I mean, I know that sounds dumb, but if I had two log level parameters.
Yeah, I think the general rule is the first one is picked up.
Right. Okay.
Okay, this one totally makes sense of I can't bind foo.
Do we have the inverse, I'm assuming?
Steve had asked that earlier. And
oh, right there. Yep, next one. 14 and 15. Yep.
Yep.
Yes, but potentially this could be supported. I don't like. Is it? Do we want this to be? So, what if we have a message template, but we want to still add, like, attach some key value pairs to the log itself as a state? Should this be a warning or should this be allowed? That's the question.
I mean, really, it comes down to if you think it's going to be rare, but it's a useful diagnostic, then to me a warning makes perfect sense, and you'll suppress it in the 3 cases in your lifetime that you run or that you wanted to do. That it's not part of the message, but it is part of the payload.
But the source generator is not going to use it, right?
It could. I mean,
what's it going to do in 6.0?
It's in 6.0.
If I define it like this. If I define it like this, what is it going to do with string foo?
Maybe it will attach it as key value pairs to the downwards structure of log messages. So if you do JSON console output, look at the JSON console output. Yeah, thank you. One of those examples is lower down that had JSON. Maybe it will have city, province, and then country as well, even though it's not in the message template. I'll confirm, but that's...
I thought right now it throws at runtime though, right? Logger message define will throw.
Logger message.define will not accept that, but the generator could potentially. Okay, so the question was, what does the define API do? Sorry, I didn't realize.
No, I said the current behavior is it will throw at runtime.
Yeah,
it could do something different, but it doesn't do anything right now.
So with a defined thing, if you give it a name that wasn't part of the template, it throws?
It's not allowed, yeah. You have to, because you know how when you define it, you have the action equals to the action is the return of the define API, so they have to match, the arguments need to match.
Right, you can't pass in more because you only passed in 3 into the define method. So now you get an action back that only takes 3, you can't pass in 4.
It's compile time, yeah.
So I would say, my opinion would be, if we're not going to do anything with it, we definitely should warn or error. We should give some sort of diagnostic. If we're going to do something with it, it feels weird about giving a diagnostic.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't currently do anything with it, then my guess is you would want in the future a parameter attribute that says, please shove this in the context bucket even though it's not in the message. And then if they had that on a parameter, you would consider it used and then wouldn't issue the warning. So I think the warning is probably just... Sorry, if in the future you have this shows up in the structured payload but not in the message. If that's not a feature you already have, then presumably you want I would expect an attribute that you would have to put on the parameter that says do that thing, and it would basically be like in C, just putting it in void the thing of, yes, I had a parameter you thought I was unused, but I still need it in the signature, please leave it there. So I think that warning on unused parameters is good. Like, lots of things warn on unused parameters. This is one of them.
Some loggers don't have that structured payload stuff, right?
Yeah, some don't. You mean like console, the simple console?
The simple in the system D.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think 15's good. In the rare cases somebody wants to suppress it, it's a warning. You can suppress it.
And we don't do anything with the parameter. The source gen doesn't do anything with the parameter.
It could attach it to the.
But does it?
But doesn't.
Right.
Good. Right. So, yeah, it's the if you change that after 6, then you have to decide: does somebody need to opt into it, or do you just assume that's what they meant, or whatever? And but right now, your current suggestion is it will just ignore it because it wasn't part of the template, which is totally legit.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the warning.
We warned you.
Yep. Understood. 16 we already seen. It was the method body. It's just it was next to.
Oh, this together is 16. Okay.
Yeah. 17.
Right. This is you didn't tell me the log level and you didn't take it as a parameter, so I don't know how I'm supposed to make that up. So tell me.
Yes.
Yep.
Was the one already that you had it in both?
Then did you say log level? I don't have a sample for that, but that should be. I mean.
I have it in both the attribute and in my signature.
Then I think the second one should. That's a good one. I think I'm not sure if there isn't any. Then I'll add it. Yeah. If there isn't any, I'll add it.
A template for logger, huh? People do this?
Which number?
I was on 18.
Okay. Oh.
It seems rather esoteric.
What?
Yeah, I mean, I can see how it's you probably shouldn't have done it.
Yeah, well, this just seems to be the general. I have support for 3 magic. The first one of these that I see is magic, and so it makes sense with the other one. If you took 2 loggers, it's either that is going to be an error. It'll just call toString on the second one. But I think this one is I was already a special parameter. You probably didn't mean to do what you did, but I don't think it should be an error. It should be a warning.
I was just gonna. Are the other ones errors or warnings?
The
exception and the log level.
Exception says it's a warning.
No.
And
yeah, it should be a warning.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
$19. You didn't have it as a.
So 19 and 20 are similar. The 19 is the one with no. It's an instance log method with no field of logger.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is with more than one. Found multiple fields. Number 20.
Yep. Makes sense.
Okay, so
multiple fields are errors because we can't continue.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's why the number 18 was also error because we couldn't continue, but.
Well, but you can. You would just send the logger as a toString inside the message.
In the case of exception, providing mismatching exception, is that also a warning? Was it 13?
13, don't log the exception because it's already special. You had listed as a warning.
Okay, so then this one would be a warning. Okay, thank you. Oh.
And
I think that the feedback from the messages, what I have so far is add one for log level, and then also for 18 make warning rather than error. And we talked about 15. We said that's okay, but like there were the info ones. The date time you guys said drop it.
Yep, that was 12.
That was 12.
15. And then collapse all the numbers. Right? We want all the numbers to be continuous.
Yeah, and syslog, I think there's already a bunch that exist already, so I have to find them to see.
Yeah, and then you had syslib on all of these, and I don't know if that's the right answer.
It was a recommendation from last week to, rather than have one per library, just you pick, I think the obsoleted error diagnostics start with syslib. And so I picked that, but I believe that there are a bunch that exist already.
Okay. I mean, Emo, you're the one in charge of names. I thought syslib meant in the shared runtime.
Oh, okay. I see.
I think that was just basically we try to come up with a prefix that represents us rather than anybody else. So if we own it, we can use it.
Okay. And so. Yeah, so all of these error numbers, we've added a bunch of obsoletes, like they may all need to be shifted and compacted and like.
Yeah, I think we already have up through like syslib 0015 or something.
Yeah. But
is the rule there like things that are in libraries that are in .NET runtime get to have syslib stuff? Is that the general thinking rule?
Well, it's basically like logically the way to think about this is that this is basically platform level stuff. So whether it's in the runtime repo or not doesn't really matter. It's more like our team versus anybody else who happens to work at Microsoft, right? So we don't want the Azure team to do it, for example, because the whole point is to have one namespace, which is the prefix, and basically say only we get to add entries here because we are the ones who make sure that the numbers are unique.
What about like the EF team, or the ASP.NET team, or WPF team?
I think those are all logically, to me, part of the same group. So I'd be okay if they use it too.
Yeah, personally, I think the more sane approach, just because it's easier to reconcile things, is because we have the constants file in our repo, is if it's in a different repo, you want a different prefix so we don't end up with non-atomic commits. Like,
sure, I can go with that too.
It's when you check in, can you edit the file that has syslib error codes in it and commit atomically? Yes, use syslib. No, use something else.
So libraries in .NET runtime.
Yeah, so like the reason I care less about us is that because we all ship as part of the product. So like I have confidence that we will find duplicates. It's more about third parties, realistically. That's really the thing I try to avoid. And so like originally that was like a name that was like libraries or libs or net library or something that a third party might realistically say, oh, I'm supposed to use that. And that's why we ended up with syslib, which kind of indicates that, okay, I'm not a system library, so I'm not getting to use that. So yeah, if you want to say WPF has to invent their own prefix, that's also fine. But they would have to do something similar to us, as in make it very clear that it's their prefix. So WPF as a prefix, for example, would be pretty clear.
Okay.
As would ASP or whatever.
Or like MLNet, if we wanted to. Even, I mean, that's actually a really good one because that is us, but it's not our repo, or not this repo, not the .NET Runtime repo.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think this covers the feedback we had on the diagnostic codes and the attribute, and so we're good with this issue. Yes?
Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay. And cascade of generic arguments.
Yes.
Does anyone care?
Why is there 2 of them?
There is a skip enabled check, which in by default at first it didn't exist. Like the reason for having the skip enabled check is if basically it just drops one enabled check in the implementation.
Should that just be a default parameter and we have half as many of these?
I believe the up to 6 generics doesn't have it as a default parameter. So.
But that's because the statement was it was added later, right?
It was, yeah. It was
right. So the new one, we can't get rid of the old methods because any existing assembly still needs to call the target that didn't have a Boolean. The new ones, it can be a default parameter. We can also double everything. I don't strongly care. I'm just asking questions.
I don't have an opinion, so either way.
I have a more general question, which is, this exists to eliminate an if. That if shows up in profiles, like that's a visible amount of work that we end up doing. That's enough to add checks for it to eliminate it.
I don't have perf numbers in front of me, or I haven't checked specifically for that, but I believe, I mean, the reason I'm saying that is because I don't know if there are other code, part of the code that like make us not want to care about that call, but I don't have an opinion. But the answer to your
more like
question,
it'd be good to double check. Like if I've got 16 arguments and I'm copying them all into some log value struct,
yeah,
I'm skeptical that if log value is less than something check is going to show up in a trace.
Yeah. That's why I said I don't have numbers to do that.
Yeah, but it would also be a little weird if you thought it was appropriate at 3, and then you changed to something that had 5 more arguments, and now your compile fails with.
I'm questioning whether it's appropriate at 3 as well. I know we just added it.
Fair enough. Yeah,
if we did it there, we should do it here, but we could also not do it here and remove it if it was premature optimization.
That's fair.
I see.
I was expecting you to fill the silence, Steve, with, oh my god, there's like 400 bytes of IL expressed here that don't need to be if we just made it a default parameter.
Well, honestly, I'm less concerned with the IL and more concerned with the assembly code that's going to be generated for all of these things when you use them. Every combination of generic arguments, if any one of them is a value type, is going to result in generic specialization for not only these, but all of the methods that take this as a T.
Yep. Because as long as they're all reference types, it's all the shared thing modulo field copies, but one value type equals another 3K of.
Essentially, we're going to end up with every single log method with unique arguments in this, unique arguments in a unique order, resulting in some presumably large portion of the logging code path being duplicated.
How would it be mitigated?
It's a trade-off between wanting to avoid boxing and boxing.
Yeah, like the answer at the end would be, you hit a complicated state and it says, you know what, I take object bracket bracket. We're done now.
Sorry, like one question I have is like these are all generic methods, right? So you only pay for the ones you instantiate, right?
Yes.
But
So
the
what does it matter
runtime will
whether we have
take
16 or-
it will take the class that represents system.action, and it will see, oh, because you now have an int in the fourth argument and you've never had an int in the fourth argument, I have to go take this 15 argument version of action and make a copy, because int means that there's a different register size that happens now.
And I think the 15 argument version of this is also instantiating the 15 argument version of log values. And then that 15 argument version of log values is being passed as a T state to some other method. And so all of those code paths end up being generic specialization for the JIT to go and generate.
I see. But that argument is not for whether we have, up to T7 or up to T16. This is more a generic issue because we decided to avoid boxing by having these multiple generics in the first place, right?
That's correct. Although, in theory, the fact that you allow 16 times 15 times 14 times 13 permutations of this enables you to have more combinations. But in reality, just how many log calls do you have? You could end up with that many copies of your code.
The boxing is likely also not going to be a concern when you compare it to anything over 4 arguments is going to have to be passed by shadow copy anyways. And so most of your arguments once you get over 4 are going to start being really inefficient just because you've got to shadow copy them and then access them via indirection anytime you want to deal with them. So there's going to be more stack spilling and other things. And
this comes down to folks looking at an allocation trace and thinking that the end-all be-all is eliminating things from that allocation trace.
Yeah.
Anyhow, to your point, Jeremy or Emo, whoever made it, it's not specific to these overloads. It's sort of the approach in general.
Did they just say approve it for some reasonable number for now only? And
like
say
6?
Like some number that is more than 3, let's say, because 3 seems, 3, 4, 5, I can see. And then we just say we have maybe one that just takes object array, and the generator just says, if you have more than that, I just call that guy.
Yeah. So what happened? Yeah. What do you have to do right now if you need 7?
Then, obviously, with someone without the generator, it's not possible. They can't use obviously any of the define APIs, but then they would have to define. Okay, the alternative would be to define a bunch of let's say structs that implement I key value pair of what's it like? I read only list of key value pair from string to objects, and let's say for 7, 8, 9, 10, all of these. And yeah, so basically they would need these types, those generic types, I guess, rather than calling into define directly.
Because maybe it's the final one should just be action of logger I enumerable of key value pair of string to object, and then whatever stuff comes after it.
Yeah.
And that we say we're saying no to all of these, but you can add the one that takes key value pairs.
I think if you remember the last API review, there were a bunch of structs that were being part of the original API review, the next logger message attribute, and the one that would I can paste it in the comments. So like maybe the alternative to doing this would be to have those and then. Because the code generator, if we don't add these bunch, would have to generate different structs every time for different.
There's also a simpler option, which is logger message define hasn't supported more than 6 parameters. We won't do it in the new model either.
Is there a way to basically log any prefix and then log parts of the line? That way you can actually like break it up into 2 separate like
I believe not.
6 arguments.
Because each call to log would want to create one log message structure, I guess.
It almost seems to me like if there was a way to basically build the log structure message iteratively, like with console.writeLine or versus console.write, you have the option to iteratively build up your line, and several other loggers support that as well, in which case you wouldn't need 16. You could just break it up into several efficient calls.
Mm-hmm. Something to think about.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is we're suggesting adding these just so the generator can already know how to call them, but we haven't had a scenario for it yet, so maybe we should just say no until we have a scenario.
And then the generator either would also
fail,
not be able to have more than 6 parameters, or alternatively it would have to generate structs, auto-generate structs as well if there's more than 6 arguments provided that it would call on to.
Yeah, I mean, I think for right now, saying it's the first version of the generator until you actually get feedback for the scenario to know what you want to do, it just fails past 6.
Sure.
For the sake of completeness, I should mention that there's something called logging scopes, which is another way to add key value pairs to a logging call site. It's just that they won't be part of the referenced message template. So there does exist a mechanism to add more key value pairs.
Fair enough. All right, so we're saying no until there's a scenario?
Okay.
I think that's reasonable.
Steve, Emo, somebody want to second that for me?
Sounds fine.
Cool. I'm just making sure I'm not making unilateral decisions here. So.
Yeah, your unilateral decisions are pretty good.
All right, let's. Can we have the 11 to 12 meeting back then? You don't need to comment. All right.
Wait, I think I just got angry.
We can tell because you're still nice. Comment, reject.
I guess my question is, like, why did action have 16 overloads?
Close it, Jeremy. That's how that works. Rejection is close.
Okay, so remove ready and hit close.
Yeah. Oh, I can also, it doesn't matter. Sorry, Stephen.
It's okay.
I mean, I think it's a little bit of the so that we can do things just with lambdas conveniently, and the other is it's just a number bigger than we ever expect.
I think action is universally used, and this is specific to a particular scenario. There was demonstrated need for larger numbers of actions, and here there's a potential fallback. If the generator wants to, it can spit out the types. The concern there is just more IL than is necessary if multiple assemblies. So there's options until it's proven to be needed, and then more can be added.
Yeah, because that wasn't, no forever. That was no until we understand why we're doing it.
Action also ends up being an exchange type, whereas these are not.
If we had just done delegate structurally in the first place, we wouldn't need an exchange delegate type.
Alas.
Yeah, I hate that predicate of T is not assignable to func of Boolean T. Get the runtime on delegate collapsing, and I would appreciate that.
Those aren't assignable because you've got the T and the bool reversed. The return type comes last.
Okay, I think I had it right in my head and wrong in my mouth.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, the predicate of bool and func of bool are not interchangeable. Ha! The order doesn't matter now. That has always disappointed me because predicate is such a prettier name to use. All right. And now we're rambling because we have, for once, had an agenda and stuck to it and finished with like 4 minutes to go. So, hooray.
Anyone want to go for another hour?
Not again.
I'm free.
No, I have to go, so I'll decide now.
Emo or Jeremy, whoever's running Tuesday's meeting, it'd be awesome if we could get to the interpolated string stuff.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, I read the first one partially because it's quite an essay that you put together there. Do you think we can do both of them in one meeting, or is the second part as big as the first one?
The second part is requires the context of the first, and is largely then just looking at, do we care about this scenario, and if so, the APIs are pretty much dictated for us other than names.
Gotcha.
The first one is, this is necessary to support the whole feature.
Okay.
All right. So basically we're just saying these are the highest priority blocking items, so they'll be how we start, and because you already split it into two, you're suggesting it's also how we'll end. So.
Yeah, I mean, if we only got to part 1 on Tuesday, I could make forward progress. It'd be nice if we got to part 2. My guess is part 1's, an hour plus, and part 2 is a half an hour, is my guess. But famous last words, they're probably both going to take 17 meetings.
Yeah, I don't think that. Does anybody know the one that from Fowler, the six-term one, is that actually important, or did you just mark it because it's pretty to be marked?
I think he wants to use it to revise some existing functionality and make it more robust.
But it's okay if we do this after the string interpolation.
I mean, from my perspective, I'd rather do the string interpolation ones first.
Yeah, I think Emo said after. Emo, your microphone has jumped into a cave again. So.
I'm so sorry.
Now it's better.
Yeah, I picked up the phone and I speak directly into it. All right, so then we do on Tuesday, we do the first one, and then see how far we get.
Sweet.
Yeah, and then we can do an audible if it feels like we won't have time to do 2, but we can slip something else in after 1, then we'll...
I'd be fine with that as well if we wanted to do part 1 and do the sig term thing after that. Although part 2 does require a lot of the context from part 1, so they probably make sense to do close together.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Then good night, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Enjoy your beer, whatever you do now.
Thank you.
It is Friday already. Wow. All right. And